Introducing The Fiber, brought to you by Live Oak Fiber. This open forum is meant to inspire, empower, and set the record straight for consumers and better broadband enthusiasts alike. Hey, thanks for tuning in to The Fiber. I'm your host, Kimber McCafferty. Today we're joined by Tim Bryan.
Morning.
And thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself in terms of where you work and your title, simply because you do a couple things, right? I know you're involved in president, CEO of NRTC, and then CrowdFiber. For the audience at large, what does that mean? What is NRTC, CrowdFiber, and then is there anything else that you do?
Sure. NRTC is a cooperative designed to provide technology to rural utilities. So we work with rural electric cooperatives, we work with rural telephone cooperatives, and we work with other sort of small, medium, family-owned, independent broadband operators, mostly in rural America. And our basic goal at NRTC is to help them deploy technology to serve rural America. So we have four primary areas where we do it. I know what we're going to talk about today is broadband, and that's a pretty important area for us. But we build broadband. Between ourselves and our cooperatives, we've probably invested $3.5 billion in the last 7 or 8 years to bring broadband to rural America, 45 different projects, 300 feasibility studies. So that's one aspect of our business, sort of engineer it and build it, which is what Live Oak is doing. We have another aspect of managing broadband. That's where CrowdFiber comes in, managed services to help broadband operators sort of run their back end. How can you take calls? How can you do tech support, network operations support, spam, email, marketing support for CrowdFiber? So managed services. We have a big mobile operation. We're one of the largest MVNOs in the country, believe it or not. Comcast and Spectrum took a cue from our book, and now are pretty large MVNOs themselves, but we do the exact same thing they do. We're able to offer mobile service, white-labeled mobile service to all of our broadband providers so they can compete if they want to offer mobile. So that's a pretty big part of the business. And then we have a large smart grid business on the electric side. If you can imagine, smart meters, a lot of renewable energy projects. We're building one of the largest wind generation projects right now in North Dakota, by way of example. So all in all, about 1,000 employees in 8 locations across the United States. That's NRTC.
Where are you headquartered?
We're headquartered in Herndon, Virginia. And as I say, we have a lot of offices in a variety of spots in rural America.
Prior to NRTC, it looks like you have, deep broadband roots, and you also touched on a couple other things prior to the show today. How did you get started in the industry and continue to champion your passion today for this industry?
You'd probably like to hear on a podcast that it was all planned out and I had it all in mind and I had this all sorted out, but it was a little bit luck, to be honest. I ended up in banking right out of college, and I sort of gravitated toward telecommunications. It was this sort of hot new thing. At the time, the hot new thing was radio and television broadcasting. Cellular had just sort of poked its head out and had a look around, but cable TV. So I was a lender to these industries until I got hired by one of my customers, and I became the vice president treasurer of a cable TV company in Denver. And then followed that up by becoming the chief financial officer of a cable TV company. That company bought out our partner in Europe, Philips Electronics, became president of our operation in Europe, largest cable TV operator in Europe. And at the very beginning of broadband, really, it was just kind of when broadband had gotten started. And so did that for a while, then moved back to the U.S. and kind of went over to the wireless industry and spent 10 years in wireless on several wireless boards. My favorite was Nextel. We talked a little bit about that before the podcast. Nextel was a great company, if you remember Push to Talk.
Sure.
Nationwide Push to Talk.
Yeah.
Spectacular company, swallowed up by Sprint, and then lamentably not good things happened to Nextel after that. But it was a great experience. I ran a satellite company, which we sold to Dish Networks, Charlie Ergen and Dish Networks. And for the listeners who'd like a little bit of a story, I retired. I was done. This is in 2011, and I play ice hockey.
Oh, I love
I'm
it.
sitting on the bench playing ice hockey, and this guy sitting next to me said, "Don't you do like wireless stuff?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I work for this company, and we made this wireless investment. We're not so sure about it. Would you do some consulting with us?" I said, "Sure." And that was NRTC. I did some consulting with him. Shortly thereafter, I became the CEO. So great things happen when you play ice hockey. That's the only lesson you need to take from this.
So how long has NRTC been in the game then?
NRTC's been around since 1986.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say its biggest claim to fame before now was for about 12 or 13 years, NRTC had struck a deal with DirecTV, and NRTC had exclusive franchise territory for DirecTV. And so all of our electric and telephone cooperatives could take a piece of this exclusive territory and offer DirecTV in their rural community, and it was exclusive. Like if you wanted DirecTV in vast swath of rural America, you would have to get it from one of our cooperatives. So it was a great business. DirecTV got big, bought us out, and that was the end of our DirecTV business. But until probably the late 2007, 2008, 2009, it was a big business for NRTC.
How was CrowdFiber born within your platform? We use CrowdFiber here at, we're also one of your clients.
Yep.
You know, that keeps this kind of fun for us. But how was that born? And was it under you?
I'd love to take credit. It would
Sure.
be great because I love CrowdFiber, but it wasn't me.
Okay.
It's a guy named Bailey White.
Uh-huh.
Bailey sort of invented CrowdFiber with a couple of partners out of Rome, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Built the database up, built the all of the systems up. We did a lot of work with CrowdFiber, and what we found is, when we work with outside companies and we really find that we share a similar mission and similar values, we invite them in. And so CrowdFiber became part of NRTC about three and a half years ago. So we acquired them, and Bailey and his team have continued to develop and improve CrowdFiber since then.
You don't know how many CrowdFiber discussions I'm in each week. For the people listening, can you explain what CrowdFiber really does?
I mean, the initial goal of CrowdFiber was to sort of be a crowd marketing kind of a tool that if you were going to build a broadband operation, what you would do is you would go out to all of the folks who could potentially receive it and get them to sign up and show some interest. And you could then categorize that interest by location, even by perhaps how you would build your network. In many cases, companies would say, look, when 50% of this street decides they're going to take broadband service from us on our CrowdFiber app, then we'll start to build it. So it was this notion that you could get the community involved and gathered up in a way that would help you gauge interest and then really help you how you would want to build your network to go to the places where interest was greatest. It's migrated some from that. I'd say and this was not something we did with Live Oak, but we took about 58 different companies to the RDOF auction, the FCC RDOF auction, and we did all of the bidding and all of the mapping in CrowdFiber so that you could visually see what you were bidding on as part of the database in CrowdFiber. You could see all those areas, and so it's morphed into becoming a much more sort of a holistic tool for broadband providers.
It's my first stint at marketing it this way. And so I thought, this is interesting. So we're going to see kind of people in zones eligible and pre-register them, and then we lay. And I wanted to see, and we've had great success. Like I'm thoroughly enjoying the product immensely. Something that you mentioned that kind of keeps us in alignment too is, have you always championed rural America? You brought rural up in several instances in terms of the pillars and where you've operated. So with that being said, why rural America for you?
I think I've had a passion for rural America. I wouldn't call myself a farmer, but I've owned a farm for over 22 years. It's in rural America, in rural Virginia, central Virginia. I just, the mission of serving that part of the country and giving them equal access to the technology that exists everywhere else, I think is just a fundamental, basic sort of American value, I guess would be the best way to say it. And it's really interesting. It really resonates. For example, we do employee surveys every few years, and when we asked our employees, do you agree with the mission and the values of NRTC? 91% said they agree or strongly agree with our mission statement and our values. 9% were neutral, 0. Nobody's. So it's kind of hard to find another company where you'd have such strong alignment around your mission and your values as serving rural America and serving our members. Ultimately, we operate like any other company. We have a board and a CEO and a CFO and budgets, and we have monthly P&L reviews and all those other sorts of things. But unlike many other companies, we're owned by our members. We're owned by the people we do business with. We're owned by our members. And so as a consequence, if a company has to say, well, let's see, I have to take a decision. Do I take the decision in the best interest of my customers, or do I take the decision in the best interest of my shareholders? And there's always tension there. Mm-hmm. For NRTC, they're one and the same.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, makes it easy.
How much have you seen the industry change since you got started?
Wow.
Broad question.
That's a big question. I'd say, there's always been a clash in the telecommunications industry, really. If you look at it in a very big picture way, content distribution, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You worked for HSN. Mm-hmm. You were content. I worked for a cable company. I was distribution.
Yes.
And so the question always was, okay, if there's $1 to be made, who gets it? Do the content people get it? Do the distribution people get it?
Listen, you're talking my language, right? Yes.
How do you?
I've been talent since I was very young, and my own, I went to bat for it. So yeah, you have to know your worth, but then you have to hear the other side and be a little diplomatic as well.
I mean, so and this has been so for decades, content, and let's call content linear video programming. So let's call content HBO or CNN or the Weather Channel. Mm-hmm. Content didn't have a very easy way to go direct to the consumer, because you got to remember, I'm old. You're a lot younger than I am, and probably the people I'm talking to are a lot younger than I am. There was no internet, there was no broadband, there was no wireless service. So this notion that if the Weather Channel and the CNN and Fox News wanted to get to the end user, they had to go through a gatekeeper, which was a cable company.
Sure.
And the cable company spent money, and they built the network, and they built the distribution, and then they distributed the content, and the content and distribution folks fell into, a business model that worked. Probably the first really big change in that business model was obviously the advent of the internet, but also the advent of broadband and the advent of devices. Apple and Apple Music was one of the very first times they said to the content folks, you don't have to go to the record companies. You don't have to go to MTV. You can go direct to the consumer. You're going to sell your songs for 99 cents. And Apple said, sort of formed that first direct content to the consumer. And this, of course, is what you're seeing. The distribution companies have built unbelievable distribution networks, fiber networks with great throughput and capacity, which now gives the content owners the ability to go direct to the consumers. And they have Hulu or YouTube or Disney or Paramount or Showtime or
all your OTT,
all the over-the-top things. So I'd say that's probably the biggest change. And then the second, and it's not really a change, but it's turned out to be a universal truth. Build it and they will come. If you develop throughput and capacity on a network, something will come along to use that capacity, mm-hmm. right? If all of a sudden there's broadband capacity in the nation, a company like Netflix can now thrive where it couldn't in the past.
And play their content as much as some of these big players did in the past.
Absolutely.
Which is what we've seen happen.
And direct to the consumer, mm-hmm. right? And so if you develop content, gaming will come along, and then sort of real-time gaming, which requires, very low latency, very high throughput kind of networks. So if you build throughput and capacity, which is what Live Oak is doing, there will be a use that will come along that will use that capacity.
I experienced the Wheel of Death struggle just firsthand, and one of the things at Live Oak is they wanted to hire local. And I live far enough outside market, but enough to where I still feel the same pain that the lack of having a thriving and fast internet speeds can bring. I've owned a business for many, many years, worked from home for many years, but had moved back to St. Augustine, Florida. And I mean, my internet would go out quite often. And so when I was approached about coming aboard, and had lived it for 7 years, and it did affect my ROI and my bottom line,
Yep.
I thought, oh, I can speak to this. I mean, firsthand, I know, what these consumers are going through. And then the pandemic comes along, right? And, Glenn County, where we're sitting in today in Brunswick, telehealth was an issue. Online education was an issue. Working remotely when the entire country closed down was an issue. And it kind of just said, okay, this place is on the map and fertile for what we have to offer as an internet service provider. If you had anything to say to consumers listening or those that may not understand the technology that goes into the robust infrastructure that we are building in these markets, and I think a good place to start is what's the difference between us and the cable fiber companies now that are trying to come out and, not excited about what our solution really is, but sitting on an older infrastructure that really isn't the same as what we're bringing these communities at large.
Yeah, and really, it of course varies all around the map in terms of what the competitive environment is. Certain cable players have gone to greater lengths to upgrade their networks and to increase capacity in their networks, and essentially what that involves is starting to replace coaxial cable and putting in fiber. So they're trying to get fiber deeper and deeper and deeper, and then just finish the last drop and the last bits of the distribution network using coaxial cable.
In your more metropolitan areas, though, not in rural America.
And in rural America, well, a lot of cable operators don't operate in rural America. There are many, many places where we operate. There are no cable providers whatsoever. Right. There's only a local telco there are many, many places in rural America where telcos still only offer DSL service, for example. There are places in rural America. I live 11 miles from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. I have no wired service to my farm whatsoever. I can't get it.
I can't even imagine.
I have to pay Elon Musk $120 a month to get Starlink satellite service from Elon. So the competitive environment really, really sort of moves around. I think what most of our rural utility providers, whether they're electric or broadband providers, almost all of them are local. Mm-hmm. Almost all of them have a local brand. They are involved in their community. Many times the electric cooperative is the largest employer in the community. Mm-hmm. So they don't have anything other than that community to focus on. That's sort of the bread and butter of their business. And so as a consequence, it's not just bringing better technology. It's bringing a sort of vision of stewardship and care to that customer. I hate to use Comcast as an example, but I have Comcast on St. Simon's Island. I know for a fact you guys got a fiber nearby. I'm going to hold you to get me hooked up. But
you're next on our list.
It's really I have a duplex. One side was on, one side was out. You report it as out. And they said, well, we're doing service work in the area. It's probably that. And you're thinking, it's not that, because one side, but you can't talk to anybody. So you say, no, it's not that. Okay, well, then we don't know what it is. You'll have to wait until after 11 o'clock to call us. So I called anyhow, and they said, well, on their voice response system, you'll have to unplug your modem and then replug it in before we'll talk to you. So I did that. Then you get a call 20 minutes later. Did that solve the problem? No. Okay. We'll connect you to a representative. I'm thinking, now we're going.
Woo!
They connect you to a representative, and the IVR says, okay, your hold time is currently over 60 minutes, so we'll call you back. 70-minute call time. Now, we provide call, help desk, and some call services
for us.
For you.
Yeah.
Our standard is 90 seconds. 90 seconds, but in 21 of the last 22 months, the summer was pretty rough. We provided it in under 60 seconds. Okay. And these guys' standard is 70 minutes. I mean, there's a huge difference in sort of your approach to the customer when you say, I'm going to do my best to answer your call with a live human in 60 seconds or 60 minutes.
And we're lucky if they speak English. That's a bone of contention for me is that part is hard, being all-encompassing in everything, though. I have a hard time with the communication aspect when we do actually get somebody on the phone.
We only use domestic-based call centers. There's a cost factor associated with staying domestic. Obviously, it's more expensive than doing it abroad. But we've done, number one, we wouldn't do it abroad no matter what because we're a domestic company. But when you look at the call handle time, because of the language barriers and sometimes the communication barriers, and you look at the elongated call time, and then you factor that into the cost, it's a fool's errand. You don't save money, and you just irritate people in the process. So as a consequence, we operate domestically.
Anything new coming up? What's next for NRTC? Technology's always changing. Things are always evolving. You've seen it change a lot since you got started. So what do you see next?
I think there's a few things. Obviously, the federal government, in the COVID era, laid out lots of sort of grant opportunities, this BEAD funding that's coming from NTIA, and is going to cause a lot of people to relook at rural broadband. So I expect for 3-4 years, sort of during the next 3 to 4 years, there will be a lot of broadband building, and I think a lot of rural America will get nicely covered with broadband. So we're staffing up. We're preparing for what we see as, a 3 to 4 year kind of push based on some of these funding programs. So on the broadband side, we see that. On the electric side, and I know that's not a primary interest to your listeners, but
no, it's good. Go there.
There's a lot going on the electric side. Number one, there's also federal funding to modernize the grid. And in particular, it's to modernize the grid in ways that once again makes it more resilient, more accepting of renewable energy, and also just easier for customers to interact with, interacting with a meter. And so I guess I would say the same kinds of notions that you're doing. You're saying, look, we have to build more capacity and more throughput to allow greater services to the home on the broadband side. Same thing's happening on the electric side.
Sure.
To be able to use street lights, to be able to use meters, to be able to shape the demand response on really hot days in order to be able to allow customers to opt in and opt out of things, to be able to move thermostats, turn off water heaters. All those require a network with greater throughput and capacity. So that's happening on the electric side.
And it's NRTC Crowd Fiber. Are you affiliated with any other? You have a nice portfolio, sir. So are you affiliated with any other organizations now?
Well, we have a couple other sort of brand names that have been out there. Telespire is a brand name that of our MVNO. Neonova is a brand name of our managed service. But for the most part, most of the things in NRTC are branded NRTC. So I would say I don't know of any other. There are no other real brands out there, but our business units are really where all the interesting action takes place: smart grid, broadband, managed, and mobile.
When you think rural America, what type of criteria goes into the mindset of, because not all of rural is eligible, right, say today. There's certain sweet spots in rural America that would be higher on the list to receive these types of proactive and progressive solutions. What type of criteria is needed to meet, say, the next build out?
Yeah. So I'll give you two answers.
Okay.
The first answer is sort of from an economic perspective, from a practical perspective. I mean, we just do we do a feasibility study, an economic analysis. We look at the territory, we look at the density, we look at the competitive environment, and we assess whether or not a broadband operation makes sense, and if so, how much it'll cost, and sort of how to deploy it. So sort of an initial thing is just this economic analysis. If the economic analysis says go, and they want to go, then you go. If it says, well, it might work if you had an extra $40 million of grant money. And that's, of course, the intersection now with these funding programs. So now you can take this economic analysis and say, look, I have these areas that are very rural, very sparsely populated, and I need help in building those. But if I got help in building those, I can build the rest. And so that's that's sort of what's happening with these grant programs, is how to intersect your feasibility study with where grant funding might be available. So that's the second answer, is where grant funding might be available. Our federal government is not exactly a model of efficiency. You will be surprised to hear that. So are your listeners. And I mean, there's probably 5 different programs, every one of which uses a completely different definition of who might be eligible or who isn't eligible. Mm-hmm. And then some of the federal government funds are going to flow to the states, who then have to come up with their own definition of who might be eligible and who might not be eligible. So as a consequence, poor people like us have to figure this out, 50 times over. Okay, well, this is an FCC program. This is a Department of Agriculture program. This is a Department of Commerce program. Hold on a minute. This is Treasury program, but it went to the states. So now we got to figure out what that program is in the states. Same thing on the electric side. The FEMA is doing some things. The Department of Energy is doing some things. Once again, the Department of Agriculture. It's
mind-numbing.
It's a mess, and it would be so nice if it said, look, we're just going to do this once, but the agencies fight with each other about who's going to, because they all like to hand out free money, and so it's a bit of a free for all out there.
What other challenges do you think the industry is facing right now as we look at kind of outlying communities, and then also the consumers, in marketing in 2 different markets, speaking transparently? Okaloosa County's been a breeze. Super savvy consumers over there, a little bit more progressive. I think everybody kind of lives the Destin life, if you will. Here, it's definitely split markets for me as a marketer. St. Simons has been easier than Brunswick. We're finding Brunswick doesn't love change. And I don't know truly how educated the consumer is, simply because they've lived without this superior solution for so long, as to how much easier we're going to make their life without hidden fees, a lower price point for people to pay. You can actually get rid of your cable and go all OTT, and then through apps and even sometimes free apps, really streamline your consumer experience and customize it any way you want it. They don't fundamentally understand it like that. So what type of challenges do you see?
I'd say the 2 biggest challenges for operators, for broadband providers, I'd say that the number 1 challenge is human resources, finding people.
Is this post-pandemic or always?
This is post-pandemic.
Yes.
I mean, it's tough to find engineers, to find field engineers, to find folks, to find contract crews to do the construction. The entire labor market is really tight, and finding people in rural America that have the skills and qualifications is tough. So I really think the labor market is at or near the top of issues for most of our larger broadband providers, particularly in rural America, to get folks to come out to rural America. So I'd say that's probably number 1. Inflation, supply chain has been a problem. It's eased a bit right at this very moment today, where we're sitting, mid to late August. As soon as this funding hits, it's going to come back. And that's a question of getting materials and material pricing. We've seen a lot of inflation inside of a lot of those sectors, inside of the electronic sector.
Sure.
Chipsets, meters on the electric side, transformers. In some cases on the electric side, transformers are 50 to 80 weeks out. So you want to build a subdivision, you tell the developer, okay, I can get you power in about 70 to 80 weeks based on when I can get transformers here. So in any event, supply chain has been an issue. And then, of course, what you mentioned, consumer take-up is always an issue. Inertia is a tough thing. Even if the service is bad, inertia is a tough thing. Look, Weather Channel's 32. I know where to go. Like, if I go to YouTube TV, how am I going to find it? By the way, I've gone over the top myself, so I'm not a.
I have.
I'm old, but I'm moving with the times.
Yeah. And how much has it made your life?
I mean, it's worked great for us, and I'm able to use it in a couple of different places. It's been great. I don't watch that. I just watch hockey on TV. So as long as I got my hockey, it's fine.
Who's your favorite hockey team?
I like, it's funny. That's a great question. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so for a long time, the Penguins. I lived in Colorado 20 years. I said, I'm going with the Avalanche. They just moved there. But when I got to D.C., they had just gotten this young man from Russia, Alexander Ovechkin.
Uh-huh.
It was very exciting. He's now the second leading goal scorer in the history of the NHL. So now I'm kind of a Caps fan. So I could say I kind of move a little bit with the tide on that one.
I was in Chicago for a while. What is the Blackhawks?
Yeah,
I was.
I
was a fan. And then I worked in Toronto for a while and really got the Maple Leafs, but up there it's just the Leafs, and enjoyed that aspect of it. And then Dallas Stars. Saw them play.
Pretty good there, Kimmer.
Yeah, I moved around a lot with my career, and I take up local sports when I do it. I was on the broadcasting side of things, so they were always throwing around tickets to the hosts, and we would attend. And no, we had a really good time with it.
Yeah. I'm sure you went to the NHL Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto when you were there. Saw the Stanley Cup.
I got to eat, literally, I got to eat cereal out of the Stanley Cup once.
I got to drink out of it.
Okay, so you get it. Yeah. It travels with it. It has its own person that travels with the Stanley Cup.
Yep.
I believe, don't they solder it too to keep it going every year? It doesn't get bigger and bigger.
No, there are bands around it that list the teams, and so they just, they could only keep, 10 or 12 years of bands. And so, off that band comes and the new band comes on. So,
I knew you'd know.
Oh, yeah.
It was probably 20 years ago. The man that traveled with the Stanley Cup came in to do a nationally syndicated show that I was a co-host on, and told us the entire story. He's actually paid a salary. Stanley Cup gets its own seat on an airplane whenever they travel. There's an entire story around it. So
a lot of things have happened to the Stanley Cup.
A lot.
Some of them not suitable for a podcast, apparently.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, anything you want to add before we wrap today? Anything you'd like to say to maybe consumers listening that would encourage them to understand the impact that we're really going to have just on their personal lives? That would be great.
Yeah. Look, I think the work you're doing, bringing fiber to Glynn County is invaluable. Sometimes, I think Steve Jobs said that he never really did surveys or asked consumers what they wanted, because in his opinion, he said, consumers don't know what they want until we give it to them. Mm-hmm. Like, all of a sudden they have an iPod and they say, oh, I really needed that, or an iPhone. And, I really feel like consumers may not know whether or not they need broadband, but they do. And when they get it, they're going to know that they have needed it and should have gotten it sooner. I think, there's probably the strongest economic correlation between economic development in a community and broadband, particularly in places where industry might not otherwise congregate. We had a turpentine or a pulpwood plant of some sort over in Brunswick that caught on fire recently, burned to the ground. Going to lose 80 jobs or 100 jobs out of that, and that plant's not coming back. So we have to develop an economic future for Brunswick and Glynn County that may not depend upon the physical location of a plant. Instead, rely on remote work, rely on a sort of new era workforce, and broadband is the absolutely foundationally critical to that.
And to your point earlier, I love that you bridged it together like that. We've chosen certain communities for a reason, and regionally, we want to be more than just the broadband provider. We consider ourselves a fiber of the community, if you will. I'm not big on us boasting over any of the philanthropic work that we're doing, but also the amount of other organizations and small businesses that we champion and get behind, or doing a back-to-school drive for all of the local children to come and get supplies that they might not have otherwise. Those type of things really do mean a lot to us as we weave ourselves into the community where we plan on planting our roots, hence the live oak, and staying. We're not going anywhere. So I thank you so much for coming in today and being a part of the fiber. We hope this is kind of an all-encompassing show. We hope to bring in other fibers within the community, understanding we're not the only players in the game in terms of businesses, to talk about how we have impacted their business and really why they stay in Glynn County. County and how special it is to them, because when you do visit these parts of the country, I feel super lucky we get to work in such a beautiful, idyllic place. It's not places I don't think that are on the map for everyone, but if you ever get a chance to visit, it's idyllic, and I love my time up here. It's beautiful. So
great. Well, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, Kimber.
Thank you too. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in. To learn more about Live Oak Fiber, visit liveoakfiber.com and feel the flow.